Hi, and welcome back to the panel room. I'm your host, Jim Nettles, and tonight we're coming in for a little genre blending. We're going to step up to the bar and see what we can pour in. So before we start having a little too much more fun here, let's see who all is coming in to bring their blends of genre. And Stuart, you're up first.
Hi, everybody. I'm Stuart Jaffe. I'm best known for the Max Porter Paranormal Mysteries, but I write all different kinds of science fiction and fantasy, and most of them all blend genre. So that's why we're here talking.
Jenny?
Hi, I'm Gini Koch. I write the Alien Captain Kitty Cat series for Doll Books, and I write under a variety of other pen names and in all lengths and genres, and I blend genres pretty much like I breathe.
Nancy?
I'm Nancy Northcott. I write historical fantasy and several different kinds of romance, and I do genre bending in the historical fantasy and genre blurring in the romances, the paranormal romances. The others, not so much. So it's sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Susan?
I am Susan Roddey. I write dark fantasy and horror as S.H. Roddey. I also write all different variations of romance under another pen name. And I'm one of those people that could not stick to a single genre if my life depended on it. So,
Jay?
I'm Jay Smith. I'm a writer, podcaster, and audio drama producer. I write mainly horror, but also science fiction. I love the blend genres, especially techno, geek, noir thrillers.
And Elle Marie.
I'm Elle Marie Wood, and I'm a psychological horror author. So by nature, psychological horror blends mystery, thriller, science fiction, fantasy, romance, etc. So just by nature, I guess I blur genre lines.
And actually, let me kind of start on that topic right there, because I mean, all of us write to an extent in science fiction, fantasy, urban fantasy, horror, these sorts of things. And so by nature of that, we're almost always by default playing in a couple of different genres. So Stuart, within that space, kind of what does genre even really start to mean just within the spaces we're writing?
Well, I think a lot of the reason you even have that is because science fiction and fantasy is more a milieu than a genre. It's just an existence of itself that we can tell a mystery story in a science fiction world. We can tell a thriller story in a science fiction world, a romance, any kind of story, we can put it in a science fiction setting or a fantasy setting. So I think that's part of what lends it to being to blending genre. Whereas if you have a romance, a contemporary romance, it takes place now. Anything that takes place now is whatever genre it is, and it can just be that. But anything that is going to be in science fiction or fantasy, by its very nature, is already going to be a type of story, which is a genre, put into science fiction or fantasy, nowadays especially.
Jenny, anything you want to add on to that?
Yeah, because I think really, based on experience, genres exist for bookstores and libraries. So they know where to put your book. And genre, and every time I say this, if they're bookstore employees or librarians, their heads start nodding. Genre people are very, very picky. So science fiction, fantasy, horror, every other group has cooties as far as they're concerned. If they're those readers. Mystery, they don't look anywhere else. You won't have anything fun for me. You want to know who will wander the entire store looking for something? Romance readers. If you put a good romance in the middle of an economics textbook and you get a romance reader who finds it, reads it, you're going to have a national bestseller because they're going to tell everybody and they're going to learn economics at the same time, and they'll be interested in it. So I like.
Aren't those the billionaire romance books?
No, not quite the same. Not quite the same. But I like to put romance in a lot of things because those readers, they read like other people pop a chicklet, okay? And if you've got a decent romance that you're not pandering in your book, you have a very good chance that romance readers are going to float over. And they're about the only ones, they're omnivore readers, and romance readers are about the only ones that look in other sections other than the sections that they are wedded to. So that's kind of my opinion of it, because otherwise everything you write crosses genre, even like a straight mystery. In a contemporary moment, something else has to be happening. They can't just not get together, right? Something has to conflict. So I think there's much more genre blurring and blending than even the categories want to tell you there is.
Nancy?
Well, I generally agree with what Stuart and Jenny said, but I would also add that genre is also for readers, because if I want a science fiction and fantasy book, I'm going to look there. Now, it can have a lot of other things in it, certainly, but it gives me kind of an idea of what's the dominant strain in the story. The Light Mage books, the shirtless guys behind me, are heavy on action, adventure, and suspense, but they're also paranormal romances. And I would say that they are predominantly romances. There may be 60-40 romance and other, whereas the War King books are mostly historical fantasy. They're probably 70-30 historical fantasy to romance, except they do have sex in them, which leads some people to conclude there is sex in this book and therefore it's a romance, which is actually not correct. But yeah.
Susan?
Well, I think as a species, humans tend to crave some type of order, and genre seems to be an easy way to classify things for us. When you're talking to somebody about something, and the first thing they're going to ask is, well, what is it? Having that genre being able to say, oh, what's science fiction, what's fantasy, it's horror, it's literary fiction, things like that. It makes it easier to kind of give the person you're talking to an idea of, well, this might be of interest to me, or yeah, I don't care at all. And like Nancy was saying, you have, like with romance is kind of its own animal, as there are very specific rules you have to follow for it to be considered predominantly romance and to be put in the romance category. Otherwise, it's going to fall into one of your other genres. If the romance isn't the central focus of the story, then it's going to be science fiction, it's going to be fantasy, it's going to be whatever. And I don't know, it helps to give people that structure so they kind of know what they're going into or getting into going into it.
Jay?
As you're talking, I'm thinking back to my graduate school, where a lot of the focus was on where are you going to sell this thing, and the genre became, first and foremost, what shelf is this going to be on? And my project was, is it Neil Stevenson or is it Jim Butcher, which is pretty a wide spectrum of possibilities, and trying to find where it's gonna sell is often how we have to speak the language between ourselves as the artists and the business side that's going to market it for us. And I think we get bogged down in that a lot. Hearing a lot about romance. I know I went to school with a lot of romance writers, and it's definitely not a monolith genre. I walked into my local Ollie's the other day, and there's an entire wall dedicated to Amish romance, which was huge for a while, and now is apparently not so. But there's several subgenres within our big labels that we can talk about, even within horror and science fiction. So I think it's using genre as a label is a great way for me to go to Thanksgiving dinner and explain what I do. And then when they ask you, what do you write? And I try not to say horror, because that's a whole other conversation that I don't want to have with the relatives. But I like speculative fiction, like the whole Harlan Ellison. I don't want to be typecast as a science fiction writer, but speculative fiction as opposed to literary fiction. I'm happy if that's the blanket statement that I give as a writer, and leave it there, because it all blends together.
All right, Elle Marie. What
So
you
Jay,
got
you avoid that conversation. I walk in with like my horror writer T-shirt on for Thanksgiving. I don't know.
For the turkey, it was kind of horrific.
Oh, listen. Look, it's what I do, right? And I just let me start by saying that I agree with what Gini mentioned about it being, a construct for the bookstore. It really, I believe that it was. If you think about some of the books that have been categorized as one thing, even though they were another thing back in the 70s and 80s, this was really, really, really predominant. I mean, just with horror fiction, at least, the titles were not called horror; they were called thriller, and it was that's not what it was. And so people were picking up books and being terrified. But I definitely think that's how we figure out where to shelve books. And interestingly enough, as there are several different ways to consider this. Like, so as a horror author, I would find myself on a horror shelf, right? But as an African-American woman, I will find myself on the African-American shelf. And that's a catch-all because you're just categorizing it by race. So there's everything in there. Horror, romance right next to each other, fantasy on the other side of that, self-help on the other side of that. It doesn't matter. If you're looking for women's literature, well, look, that's another catch-all. So there I am next to, again, a wide range of people. So I find genre to be problematic when used in that way. Is it a way to describe what we do? Sure. And to as Nancy mentioned, to signal to readers, this is what this book is going to be touching upon predominantly. Yes, it is, but I'm not sure that we, especially with all the subgenres we have now in each and every one of these, oh my goodness, I'm not sure we're doing ourselves any favors anymore. And I would submit, though, one thing, we talk about romance writers doing a lot of reading, and you're right about that, Gini. They'll read anything as long as you tell them.
Mhm.
They are reading and looking for happily ever after, and we give them this horror story that has, some that's not happily ever after, right?
Oh, yeah, that's a lie. Yeah,
that's a lie. Exactly.
That's
And if we say to them, okay, this is a romance book, as opposed to saying it's a horror book with romance elements, they feel misled. So with genre, all these definitions are correct, I think, altogether, but we have to be very careful how we use them.
I'd like to jump in on that because you're touching on something that I think is really interesting, which is in the past, the 70s, the 80s, basically before Amazon, all these genre categories were there. We already said this for bookstores, but they were not there. They were there to sell books, less to, like you were talking about, having an African-American section. They're there to just drive African-American readers or people interested in African-American authors there. They don't care what you buy, just that you're going to buy something there. And just like there was a horror section back when I was a kid, and Stephen King was huge, and then it imploded, and Stephen King is now fiction instead of horror. There is no horror. Well, horror sections are coming back, but it's another story. Or even go further back, if you can find like first printings of Lord of the Rings, like the paperback, it says science fiction on it. Not because fantasy didn't exist as a separate genre. And that was not because fantasy didn't exist. It was just science fiction is what sold. And that name sold better. Now we're in a point where bookstores, brick and mortar stores, don't drive the conversation. Amazon does. Right. And because of that, that's why we have all these subcategories, because now the reader is the one who says, it doesn't sit there and say, well, take me to the African American section. They say, I want a book about this, 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 and this. And we can narrow it down that much for them. So I think that's pushing, us authors, we've been blending genres since day one. We never cared as long as, and publishers were just like, okay, just don't blend it so much that we can't put it in one place or the other. But I think Amazon is, like I said, I think the power has shifted from the bookseller to the reader in a sense. As to how
I also want to say something. Jay brought it up, speculative fiction. In the 70s, everything we're writing, everything would have fallen under speculative fiction.
Yep.
Right. And I called myself a speculative fiction writer until it dawned on me that has now somehow become some weird little subgenre, a subgenre of science fiction. I'm like, everything's speculation. If it's fiction, and especially genre, it's all a speculation. Right. So I think the terms come around and go around and everything else. And what everybody really wants is a book they're going to like, that's going to, grab them right at the start, not have a saggy middle, and have a satisfying conclusion. So, and genre is something that helps them guess what that conclusion will be.
So let me kind of stir this pot just a little bit more, because kind of knowing the answer was going to be that fundamentally, a lot of genre is about how do I put it on the shelves? How can marketing people decide where it goes, right? Well, with the explosion and the advent of indie publishing, small press, there's a lot more options to actually get stuff out, pushed, and published, which I think is part of the reason we've got so many subgenres now, is there's enough stuff to classify that way. But at the same time, there's also a lot of other marketplaces that exist beyond just where are the handful of places that the publisher marketer is going to go try to place something, right? So Jenny, you write in both worlds. You're a hybrid author, meaning traditional and indie published, not,
Yes.
hey, I went and paid somebody to publish my book. That's a rant for a different day.
Oh, a very different, yes.
But looking at that idea of traditional versus indie publishing, or even small press publishing, how does genre and the genre blending work between the two? In other words, is there something you're seeing here in terms of how much they'll allow stuff to go into the mixer before they go and say too much vodka?
Okay, it's going to depend on your publisher and your imprint. Okay, because if we're talking about the big whatever, when I started it was the big six. I don't know what number we're at now, but it isn't six anymore. All of them have multiple imprints within them, and each imprint has its own dividing line of when you've crossed it. Which is why in traditional it really helps to have a good agent, because your agent kind of goes, it's never going to fly over here because XYZ. So yeah, I'll send it. Don't hold your breath, right? Or I'm not even wasting our time. I'm going over here where they're going to enjoy this. This is something that they would like. So you really have to have a little better handle on what your main genre is. When I was writing Touched by an Alien, I swear to you, I thought I was writing a light and funny paranormal romance, because I believe aliens are as hot as every supermodel out there and here to help, as much as I believe in vampires and werewolves. But because it was all science fiction, and actually the romance part doesn't actually matter to the plot. It's there, but it doesn't actually matter to the plot. My agent said, this is not paranormal, this is science fiction. And we're going to go over here, here, and here. And here's why we're not going there. Here's why we're not going there. I think the one you asked for is the right choice, right? So that's all traditional big, down to, I would even say the big small presses like Titan and some of the others of that level, IDW. Those are still considered, don't laugh, small press. Okay, they're just at the height of small press. And then you get all the way down to, the micro presses. One of the great things about a micro press or doing it yourself is that a micro press probably does not care about your genre all that much. Some will. Okay, some are like, we're only taking horror. And if you're not horror, we are not interested, because that's our niche. And others are like, we just want a good story. So if you've got a good story, we're here for it, right? So it gives you, I think, more freedom. But you also, then you have the distribution issue and all these other things that go along with it. But I just think the smaller your press, the more likely they are to either say absolutely not or sure, come on in. A bigger press, if you're right on the line, they might look at your book and decide you're enough on the line, or they can edit you over the line that it's theirs, right? So I have no idea if this actually answered the question or not. But there you go. There you have it. There it is.
So Nancy, I'm going to kind of change this up a little bit, because I think we beat that pretty well. That's pretty much the discussion I wanted to get into. That was kind of to beat that.
I'm glad I handled that.
It depends, right? That's the magical answer with everything in this business is it depends. When you look at the stuff you write, because you cross science fiction, you've got the urban fantasy, you've got the romance, you've got all these different elements. When you're looking at how you want to market it and where you want to market it, are you focused first on the story and the genre, or how you're planning to sell it?
Is that to me?
That's to you.
Well, considering that I couldn't sell toothbrushes to benefit the marching band in my hometown, and who doesn't need a toothbrush, how to sell it is not really my first approach to anything. But I look at, what does this story need? Like the historical fantasy, I really wanted to focus on the historical sequence of events, and I stay pretty close to the actual history. And I look for a place where there's something that's not well defined, where I can sneak my characters in and let them do something important. And then I put a romance in it because I love romance. Story is always more engaging for me if it has it, which is not to say stories that aren't a lot of fun, and I love a lot of them. But for me as a writer, I want to put romance in it. And so it's kind of a question of, okay, what kind of story is this? And when I get done with the first draft, I'll look at it and go, do I need to shade this in one direction or another to make it clearer to readers what they're going to get? I wrote one book. It's going to be a series when I get back to it, that I thought, I don't care if this sells or not. I'm enjoying this. I'm loving writing it. If it doesn't sell, I'm used to that, because that was before I'd ever published anything. So I thought, I'm just going to have fun and write this book. And it doesn't fit any pigeonholes, any marketing pigeonholes. And so I got a series of really good rejection letters for it, but they all said, we don't have a place for a book like this, which is the thing with traditional publishing. You have to either have lightning in a bottle, or you have to have something that they can say, oh, this plugs into slot 217. And so for me, it's the story first. And then luckily my agent will send it out, even if she says, I don't know. Like Jenny was saying, your agent might say, I don't know if this is the right place for this book, but if you want me to send it, I'll send it. So that's kind of where we are. Have I answered your question?
I think so. Susan, how about you?
There is absolutely no method to the madness in my head, and I'd be lying if I said there was. I am very much the type that has the idea and goes, ooh, squirrel, let's see what's going to happen here. And then I get, 50,000 words into it, and I have absolutely no idea what it is or where it's going to go. As a matter of fact, with the book that just released last week, in edits, my editor got about 3/4 of the way through it, and she calls me and she says, okay, you can decide what kind of book you actually want here, because it's entirely too many things and none of them go together. So I had to go through and rewrite probably 1/4 of it, just to strip out some of the ambiguity and make it something a little more marketable, because I'm also like Nancy. I do enjoy a good romance, and they have a tendency to creep in when I'm not looking, or when I'm not paying attention to what I'm doing, which is usually the case. And so I ended up having to go in and take a whole bunch of stuff out to kind of pull the romance back. So, because that was the part that didn't really fit as well with the rest of the story. Now, there's a lot of it still in there. It's just not as prominent as it was. And down the road in later books, it'll probably show up again. And I imagine by the time I get to book 2, we're going to be having the exact same argument, because that's it. For me, it's never about how am I going to market this? What shelf is it going to go on? Who am I going to sell it to? It's all about get this thing out of my head before it drives me crazy.
So Jay, what about you? What's your level of crazy?
Oh, 24/7, high levels all the time, plus caffeine. I think in my case, there's a lot of creative prostitution going on, and I'm not in a luxurious position of being asked to contribute. I'm out selling. So I have the I love this project passion file, but I also have about a dozen short stories and novellas that could go in any direction. And I have those because I will go to conferences and conventions, and I'll go to the usual suspects of small press publishers and editors and ask them what's coming up and find out what's next on their agenda. And I'll go back to my pile of half-baked manuscripts and go, yeah, that's a Western, but it could be a space Western. Or that is kind of grim dark, but I could add some levity to it. This is more Lovecraftian than Ghostbusters. And I'll be able to customize those half-assed manuscripts into a whole-assed manuscript when that submission time comes open, and I can actually maybe make a couple of bucks off of it. But I'll also try to keep that communication open so that I can say, if you like that story, I've got 3 others that you're not quite looking for now, but I'd love to share them with you, especially if you're paying.
Marie.
I think the topic's been pretty well covered. I mean, there's not. I think when you're trying to sell, or market or have your agent pitch your work, especially if you're going to traditional publishers, but even like Gini said, small press is going that way as well. You've got to be focused on what is the dominant genre, because even though a lot of us play in the smaller press circles when we're doing our off when we're not writing and we're not, we're out socializing and trying to do conventions and whatnot. That's really a small press world, if you will, in terms of the people who come and the people who sell there and the booksellers that set up. And so we're sort of, when we play in that world, it can feel really loosey-goosey and every genre is taken and all variations and all that. But that when you come back out and go to submit to the larger presses, that's not really the case. That hasn't really changed that much. And I'm not saying that you can't have any mixes at all, but I'm saying they're still looking for a specific thing, and you have a slimmer chance if you can't, if the dominant genre, if there is no dominant genre, that can't it can be picked out or can be emphasized in edit or called out initially, then you have just a difficult time getting them to even look at the manuscript. And so that's something to consider. But that said, that's something to consider in a general sense. If you really want to keep your blended, blurred, cross genre stuff going, there are markets for that. It may not be this large press market. It might be this smaller press that focuses on Bizarro, which I'm still not 100% sure exactly what Bizarro is. And maybe that's the point. You know what I mean? So
Hunter Thompson is still trying to figure out what he was. So
I just don't know what it is. But I mean, it's there are markets for that. It just may not be, what you might have been thinking, going to B&N or Books A Million and finding your book there because it's a traditional press deal. That might not be what it is. That doesn't mean you don't get a book deal. Just means it depends on the kind of book deal. So you don't have to necessarily stop doing your cross genre stuff or your blurred genre stuff. You just may need to change your sites.
Stuart, anything you want to throw on top?
Well, I guess just to funnel it all down into one thing, because I agree with everybody here. The thing I'd add is that something I've said it when I'm talking to new writers a lot is I tell them every few years they should sit down and have a conversation with themselves about what success means to them. What is it they're trying to accomplish, what their goal is, because this is usually what I say for whether you want to be indie or hybrid or traditional. It all depends on what you're trying to do. And in terms of what genre you're going to do or genres, it's the same question, because I'm fortunate enough that I do this full time, make my living doing this. And one of the downsides is Nancy, I think, was talking earlier about some crazy idea she had that she just wanted to write, so she wrote it. I have a couple of those ideas that I look at and I go, that's not going to make me enough money. And I need to put food on the table. So that idea gets shelved. It may come back up, maybe because I'm a hybrid author and I've worked with Falstaff like many people here. And Falstaff, John and I'll have conversations and he'll be like, what's the weirdest thing you've got going? And so I can pitch him the weirdest thing I've got going and we can go from there. But like every other has already been said, that's not going to fly at Tor or someplace else. So knowing what your goal is, if your goal is to be famous, your likelihood of being famous is much greater at a major publisher. It's still slim no matter what, but it's more likely to happen at a major publisher than as an indie, which means genre-wise, you're going to have to cater towards what they want. If you don't care about money, you just want to see your name on a book, then you can do whatever you want, and that's the other extreme, and we all lie somewhere in the middle.
So Nancy, I want to start with you on this one here. I want to play with an idea here. Let's take, and just because I'm a sick and twisted individual, let's take the Mage series. Let's kind of play, what genres are you playing with in the book series? And, how do you determine how to get the magics of the genres to play together? as I have my own blended genre right here, the Chewini that is driving me nuts.
Well, I knew that I wanted a romance series, and I knew that I wanted magic in it. And I spent a long time working on the magic system. But I also wanted it to be primarily a romance, which I think I succeeded at marginally. I mean, there are people whose judgment I trust who say these books are really 50-50. They were originally published by a traditional house and then came back to me. And so I'm reissuing them and writing some more because I picked up and wrote additions to the series after what they published, and now I publish them all. So it was just kind of like the romance has to be a driving force in the book. And I'm on convention panels with people from time to time who, if a book has sex in it, they call it a romance. And that is not the standard for what is a romance. The romance has to be the spine of the story. It has to drive the story. Otherwise, it's something else. So I also like action adventure. I like explosions. And the thing about magic is it offers the opportunity for many different kinds of explosions. And so it was really just, how do I want to put this book together? How am I going to enjoy it? And then I sent it to my agent and she really liked it. And so I sort of depend on her to say, if I'm looking for a trad contract for something, I kind of depend on her to say, this is a little bit too far this way. Like Jenny was saying earlier, it's too much, or maybe it was El Marie, too much vodka in the book. But
I think that was Jim.
well, whoever said that, it's like sometimes she'll say, there's a little bit too much vodka in this book. So with that series, I just wanted to write a particular kind of book. And if she had said, I'm not going to be able to sell this unless you do X or Y, I would have done X or Y. Have I really answered your question, or have I just rambled around the Lake District for a while?
I think we kind of hit on it. Susan, for you, we started out talking a little bit about, squirrel, right? We're going to go chase the squirrels, and it's a squirrel nest, and then you pull a story out of that. How do you go about, and I think this is really going to be for you much more about the editing process, but how do you refine down in that editing process? We started talking about that, but really kind of hone it down.
Well, my process is that I tend to do a lot of rereading and editing as I go while I'm writing, because I tend to forget things, and I'm terrible about keeping notes as I'm going, especially when I get going really well. And then I have to go back, oh wait, I don't know what I did. So I have to go back and reread what I've done to remember what I need to do. And that book in particular, it took me 4 years to write, start to finish. And it's because I kept going back and rereading it and revising it and just adding and twisting. And, it doesn't help that I really was, even though it is public domain, I was playing in somebody else's sandbox. I mean, the story, it's a Wonderland story, and it's based in that world. So there's a lot of time making the world match, making sure that the magic systems and all of the world building work and work well. Because, particularly when you are blurring or blending genres, it's all about your world building and making sure that what you're doing works and is consistent and is believable. And as long as you've got those things, all of the other little details, the subgenres, what you pull from, what you add in, all of that can fall into place fairly easily. With the case of this particular one, I was so close to it, and I love the book so much that I didn't want to cut anything out of it. And it really does take, and of course, this is also kind of my case for my everybody needs an editor hill that I will die on every single time I'm given the opportunity. But it really does take another set of eyes looking at something to see the things that you either don't want to see or you can't see because you're too close. And as much as it hurt to hear, yeah, you can't do all this, you need to back down and pick a side, ultimately I did, because I knew at the end of the day it was going to make it a more solid story and it was going to be a better book. And so did that
Yeah.
answer your question. Okay.
What about you, for you, Jay? What's a project you've got that you can kind of break it down?
I really like what Susan said, and I think I'm very, very lucky to have a circle of fellow writers who are happy to tell me where I go wrong a lot, and they're also happy to guide me toward great solutions and things I didn't think of. I will start on a project and I will find myself more often than not, I don't know where this is going to end up on the shelf. I will present a manuscript to a friend without giving it a label or a genre, and they'll tell me, I think this is leaning in one way or another. I don't think you're quite in this zone. It feels like you're going for a certain thing, but you're not quite there. Here's some ideas. And sometimes they'll tell me, for example, I wrote a book. Basically, I wrote a podcast story as a season filler between seasons of an audio drama series. It started as just a generic horror zombie story, but it ended up being a detective story in the LGBTQ market. I had no idea when I started writing that story that it was going in that direction, but I had one or two people just out of the blue said, yeah, we're seeing the same thing here, dude. And it ended up, instead of my core people of listeners who were listening to the audio drama, it was a whole different market of people who recognized traits within this character, and they connected to it on a level I never expected. So there have been times where I'll get to the middle of a story and I'll have a peer reader tell me, or a beta reader tell me, I think this is a completely different genre or subgenre than you intended. I'll even have readers tell me in the middle of a season of an audio drama, they'll tell me this is starting to sound more like a Western. Is that the direction you're going? So I'm very lucky in that when you're writing a story, you don't really know until you let it loose, either to a small group of people or to the public. But in theater, you get that immediate reaction in the middle of a season, and you can course correct. So I'm in an editorial process all the time, and I'm open to any suggestions that will help it sell. Really, did that answer? We're asking this question a lot in the group, but did that answer your question?
I think every one of us has asked that question when we're done. Did we?
That was your answer. We'll go with that. That was your answer.
Oh, good. That makes me feel great. Thanks, Jim.
You're welcome. Elle Marie?
So if we're breaking down a book series that blended or blurred genres, I mean, I tried my hand for the very first time because like I said, psychological horror does that just by virtue of what it is. But I tried deliberately to blend horror, science fiction, and romance. And I found that it was like legit romance, not just, no, there's no HEA, so maybe it's not legit romance, I'm sorry. But, it definitely has romantic elements, much more so than, like you mentioned, Nancy, that if there's sex in the book, it's a romance book. And I'm clearly doing something wrong because I have sex in my books, and they're not romance. They're not.
No, that's what some people say. That's not what I'm saying. That's what some people say.
No. Like you mentioned that some people are saying that to you. I am clearly messing that up if that's what people are thinking out there in the world. But, I tried deliberately to actually have this mix happen. And it was a lot of fun, playing in a different sandbox, if you will. I mean, I had a great time trying out, different tropes, if that I don't play with. There's not a whole lot of romance in my psychological horror typically. That there's conflict and it doesn't have anything to do with two people getting together. I mean, that's just the way it is, or not getting together. So it was interesting and unique. I was still focused though. Those were the genres I was going for, and they were clearly defined as such, with elements from all three playing a part. So I was still very mindful about, being clear about what was happening. But at the same time, it was different. It was different because, I mean, like I said, as I mentioned earlier, with psychological horror, you should be touching mystery. You should be touching thriller. That's what, I mean, psychological horror is on the quiet end of horror fiction, which is bumping right up against mystery and thriller and suspense. And that's what the story's about. If you don't have those things, you're missing the conflict. It's not always supernatural psychological horror. It often is, but it's not always. So you've got to find some way to tell your story and have it be compelling. So that's part of it. But directly infusing science fiction and romance in traditional horror, as I call it, but I don't want to say that and have people think I mean monsters, but horror fiction, not there was some supernatural elements, but there were also some extreme elements. And so it was more of what you might think of when you're thinking horror fiction, as opposed to what I traditionally write, which is the quieter end of the spectrum. So it was interesting to play in that way, freeing, if you will. Now, I'm a pantser, so I just go and I don't outline, I don't write any notes, I don't read while I go. That's not happening. It'll slow me down. So I just go with it. And it was freeing to say, oh, well, let's think about, what would be happening here if there was, don't forget you have romance. Oh, that's right. And then start writing some of it. Don't forget that part of it. It was kind of fun to do. So I can say that, definitely if you've never tried it before, it's absolutely something you should try your hand at. It's very much like, if you don't try it, you don't know if you like it or not, right? I know for a fact that I don't like horror comedy. I've watched enough of it and I don't care for it. I tried to write one and I nearly threw the paper across the room because I was like, this is not. And so I know I don't like it, right? But you don't know what you don't know what you like. I've never, prior to trying my hand at this romance piece, I had never read a full romance novel because I didn't think I liked it. I can tell you now I don't love it, but I don't hate it either. And there's some really wonderful storytelling elements that go into romance, really, really wonderful things that we explore on the horror side, just from a different angle. So you don't know that until you try. So that's the answer I'm giving to the question, Jim.
Stuart, how about you?
Well, I guess it's still a few years ago, I wrote a trilogy, the Midnight Trilogy, for Falstaff Books. And it was assigned to me, actually, in a sense, but it was specifically set out to be a hybrid of high fantasy and mystery. And so I am not a pantser. I plot things out, which really helped in this case, because there were a lot of things I did to make it work, but two things that I want to highlight. The first thing I did is looked at what the key tropes were of the two genres and where they overlapped and where they didn't, and how I could use that. And it's really important because some genre, in this case, these two genres, for example, mystery, we have, in fantasy, we often rail at horrible exposition, right? Because we've seen it done so many times, because there's so much world building to do and rules of magic and things that we have to get that exposition out. And so we've have decades of history behind us of people doing it really well and doing really poorly, and that's one of the skills you learn. In mystery, exposition is part of the deal. We're going to sit you down and the cop is going to ask you questions, and you're going to tell them a story. You're going to just give them exposition of what happened, or at least through your eyes. So those are like polar opposites, and you have to find a way to make them both satisfy a reader who wants either one or both those genres. So part of the two ways I was able to do that, one is just almost all stories follow the same general arc in terms of where their high points are going to be, low points, and all that. And so if you're a plotter, you can map those out so that your key climax of your story is also the climax of your epic quest is also the climax where we solve the mystery. And so that was one of the key things I did, was try and make sure we didn't have one happen when the other way too early than the other. The other thing I did was I created two protagonists and went back and forth chapter by chapter. One protagonist was the leader of the group that was on this quest, and the other protagonist was part of the group, but he was the one who was solving the mystery. And so I could get away with doing things that a mystery can do that a fantasy can't when I was in the mystery protagonist character. And when I was the leader of the epic quest, she could do things that my mystery dude couldn't do because she's the high fantasy leader. So that's another way to do it, is by having different characters' point of view be the different genre.
Jenny?
Jim, could I add something else about
Sure.
genre?
Please.
I agree with what everybody has said about different publishing and markets. But I think if you're aiming for a traditional publishing contract with one of the New York houses, you have to know what genre your book belongs in. And I've talked to a number of novice writers. They're on their first or second manuscript, and they tell you about the book. I'm sure we've all had this experience. They tell you about the book, and you say, well, where do you see this book fitting? Because you can't tell just from the description that they're giving you. And they say, well, I'm just going to let the editor put it where they want it. And it's like, no, really, you have a lot more flexibility, as everybody has said, with smaller presses. But for a traditional publishing contract, if you don't have lightning in a bottle, and it's incredibly arrogant and more often than not stupid to think you have lightning in a bottle, then you need to be able to know what the market niche for that book is and tailor it to that. And I think that gets lost sometimes in everybody talking about, RWA talks about write the book of your heart. Everybody talks about be true to your story. And I think you can be true to your story and aim it somewhere at the same time. And so it's if traditional publishing is an author's goal, they need to really understand the genres.
So Jenny, I'm gonna hop back for a second just to kind of round out this idea of when you take I want you to take the Alien Kitty Cat series and kind of break that one down.
Okay. Well, first of all, let me mention that where you think you're going is not necessarily where you should go. Like Marie, I'm an extreme linear writer. I start with the title and the first line, and then when I get to the end, I stop. There's not a lot of planning, but like Susan, I do go back. I edit as I go. In a lot of cases for the same reason. What was that character's name again? What did I write here? Oh, this does not belong here. This belongs over there, right? So I'm extremely linear, but I do edit as I go along. When I was starting to write it, I had a dream. About 50% of my story ideas come from dreams. And I was going to write a dark, short, noirish horror story. And what came out was neither dark nor noirish, and the horror was more on the comic book side of superhero, right? And I let it ride. I let it roll because why not? You can fix anything in post, right? And what I ended up with was a voice that I hadn't written under before, and a lot of fun, snarky sarcasm, and lots of action, and there are lots of humor and romance in it. I wrote the book I wanted to write. I mean, literally, I follow the Gertrude Stein method, which is I write for two people, myself and the reader is an afterthought. So I was writing for me. I didn't have a career at the time, right? I didn't have an agent at the time. So I'm writing whatever I feel like because why not? As I got through it, and the short story tried to reassert itself a couple of times, and I let it go, and then I cut it and wrote something that was more appropriate. I realized that this was, like I said, I thought it was paranormal, but that it was paranormal romance, but I really thought it was still more on the paranormal side, the action side, than the romance side, and I was right. And the way you determine that is if you're writing a cross or blur genre book, you pull out one in your head, you pull out one of the storylines. And romance is usually the easiest one to pull out if you have it. And if you pull out that storyline and the book collapses, then it's a romance with fantasy, science fiction, thriller, whatever elements. If, however, you pull out the romance of the book stands and it's that genre with a strong romantic subplot, which was basically how I sold it. Or my agent. I sold it to my agent that way. My agent sold it as science fiction. But, as I said earlier. So that's how that worked. I didn't focus on genre tropes. I focused on what was really good for the story. And again, I didn't have a career at that time. Now, I have to hit certain beats in every Alien book because there are expectations that I will hit them. Okay, I don't have the luxury of saying, I don't feel like doing that this book. There's an expectation in a long running series that it's going to be different, but you'd better hit these certain beats or your fans are not happy with you. So it was very different writing book 1 than it is writing, still almost done, I swear, book 17. And it's different when I write the second book in another novel series versus the first. We give so much freedom in the first book. There's so much freedom, and it's gone by book 2. You already have to hit certain things in order to manage expectations of a fan base. And so the best freedom I ever have is in a short story that isn't part of anything else, or in the first book in a new novel series. And I don't think that answered your question either, but that's our role tonight, I guess.
That's part of genre blending. I come up with a concept, I'll ignore it.
Exactly.
So no, I mean, I think we've kind of unpacked a lot of this, because there's a lot of elements when you're playing with genre, period, right? There's the tropes, there's the hard elements by genre, and much like Stuart was going to, one of the things I did want to dive into a little bit more was that idea of how do you balance tropes? How do you say these complement, these don't, some of these other subjects, and the way they play together. But kind of since we're kind of coming up on time, I want to put this out there, because no matter what, I mean, when we do any of these, we could go for 12 hours on just about any topic, which is why we come back to them, so frequently. But there's also the things of, we all have that element that is oh yeah, I wanted to talk about X, or there was this one thing I think we needed to do. And so we will boot that Jay, so we can have this Jay. Tech issues. But so, looking at and working through kind of all the different things we haven't touched on. And Susan, I'm going to throw this one to you first. The deer in the headlights. That I'm getting my soul, that dark place is being warmed just by the look at Tara. With nothing but love. This is the bending of genres. What's something we have not talked about in the ideas of working with genre and blending of genres that you think we should talk about, for you?
I don't think I have an answer for that right now. Well, I mean, we've covered, cataloging tools, and we've covered crazy off the wall ideas and how do you market it. And, I really don't know. You're gonna have to come back to me on that one, because I really don't have an answer for that right now.
All right. Elmer, what have we not touched on that you think we need to hit on?
Well, I think that as writers, we need to realize that practice does make perfect, right? And so if we don't, I touched on this a little bit in my last answer, but I'll dive in more here. If we don't stretch our legs, we're just going to write the same old thing over and over and over. And blending genres is one of those ways, or blurring genres, one of those ways when we can learn how to flesh out different stories. Before writing, like I said, before writing the story with romance elements, I hadn't even read a romance novel. I mean, I may not necessarily outline, but I definitely prepared by reading a novel to figure out if I even knew what happened in romance novels. You know what I mean? And I needed to know what some of the beats were to be able to try and write this out. If you don't try something new, you see, when you write, you shouldn't be thinking about, how do I sell this? I mean, you get to that point when you get to a completed manuscript and you say, oh, shoot, I wrote this whole thing. So now what do I do with it? Okay, sure, you can start thinking about, how do I sell it? But when you're writing, I mean, the goal can't be, I'm going to make $2 million off this. That's an unrealistic mindset. And it doesn't matter what kind of publishing you want to do. That's an unrealistic mindset. Okay, so barring that money piece of it, you should be thinking about, how do I express myself? Each story should be a new expression of yourself in terms of how you want to tell whatever the tale is. How do I want to tell this new story? Okay, I've written 200 short stories in this genre. How about I write a new short story in a different genre and tell a different story? It may not be good. You may really stink at it. It might be the worst thing you've ever sat down to do. And like I told you, I don't like, nor do I write horror comedy, but I didn't know for sure until I tried, and I'm here to tell you, no. So you have to, but that was a day or two. It was a short story, a day or two of me saying, let me try this out. So I lost a day or two, but now I understand better comedic timing. I understand it a lot better than I used to. I'm just not that good at it, and so therefore you now I know. So when you think about these, just because you say, oh, I want to write a cross-genre book, doesn't make you a cross-genre author. Okay, doesn't make you a whatever, however you want to label this. You've got to actually try and do it. And in that trial and error, you may find that you don't like it sounded good, but it's not necessarily what you really wanted to do. And that's actually fine. Be honest with yourself, but also push yourself. I think that's the thing that I wanted to say ultimately. It's because I think people come away with, they label their own selves and say, I am a mystery author. And then you hate mystery. Like, you can't stand it. You're not married to whatever you've picked in your mind or told one person that you do. You're not married to it. Like I said to Jay earlier, I'm a psychological horror author. It's because I've been writing for 40 years. Like, I've proven that that's what I do. That's kind of what I do. But moreover, forget the psychological piece. I'm an author. I'm a writer. You are a writer. So write something. Try something different. See if you like it.
Jay, what's the one thing you think we need to touch on that we haven't talked about at all? Or maybe we did talk about it.
I think tying it together, it depends on where the viewer is in their career or their aspirations. I find myself listening to folks here, and where we are at different stages in our career means that the more successful you are, the more expectations are leveled upon you, and the more you will be pigeonholed. The more you will be expected to do one thing over and over again. You will be the McDonald's of your genre. In my case, there's a freedom at the very beginning of this process. The thing that got me excited about writing as a child, and the thing that got me putting submissions in envelopes and mailing them to publishers, was writing was just this experience. And you're selling yourself short if you decide at the very beginning of your process to pick one genre. Because as Marie says, get out there and explore the different ways of telling the story, because that at our core is what we are. We're storytellers. We're writers, but more often I'm hearing, if you want to be successful, you've got to get your story read on a podcast, or you've got to become a multimedia person, or be more mindful of getting out there in social media. There's this exploration as an artist that you have at the beginning of this process that allows you that leverage, that time to try the Western, try the romance, find something that sticks with you, that allows you to retain some of that excitement that I hear a lot from part-time and full-time writers is kind of extinguished as they're forced to do things that they're paid to do as opposed to what they want to do. And that's not to say that it sucks, because every job has that. But the more time you take now at the beginning of this process to find your strength and explore the diverse world of fiction writing, the more you're gonna be able to find that you, like in the case of any other business, you're diversifying. That if you're not successful at selling something in this genre, at least you've explored the option of selling it somewhere else, selling something else. Maybe you will become the next Western author or men's fiction author, or whatever they're calling it these days. Even if you don't want to, at least you could sell that manuscript, get your name out there, and maybe you can pivot and turn that into a success down the road into the right. I guess that's my answer, Jim.
All right, Stuart. So what have we not touched on, or what do you want to dive deeper into?
So this all makes me think of the classic 6 ways to become a better writer. Is read, write. And Elmarie touched on this. Talking about herself and that she started reading some romance, and that's the key thing. Is, I mean, we should, as a writer, you should be reading far and wide anyway, but if you're going to decide to blur some genres, read in those genres, especially if you are not familiar with them, because you'll screw it up if you don't know what the tropes are. I've been reading a bunch of romance lately, not so much because I want to do a blur genre thing, but just I suck at writing romance and I want to inject some of that into my books, even just as a subplot or a subplot. So I'm reading some of it to figure out, well, how do they work? What are the beats? What are the moments that are valuable? Because especially if you're doing it as a subplot, it's not a full arc. I mean, it is a full arc, but it's not every beat that you would have in a novel. You need to hit the highlights. So you got to figure out what they are and know what authors speak to you, and what is it about their work that speaks to you. You're only going to find that out by reading, and that's the thing. You got to read the stuff.
Jenny, what have we not touched on, or what do you want to dive back into?
Well, first, I want to wholeheartedly agree with what Stuart and Elmarie said in terms of be read. Terry Brooks and Terry Pratchett both gave this advice in different times, which was you need to be extremely well read in every genre you write in. But once you start writing, you need to stop reading in that genre. And they're not wrong, because they said what happens is you unintentionally plagiarize. Now, I think once you're really comfortable in your genre, you can start reading in other people's genres again. But there was a while at the start of my career, I could not read. I remember I write in every genre. I couldn't read anything but humor, because that's the one thing that I was like safe in. Now I can read all stuff because I'm very confident in my voices. But one of the reasons why I write under so many pen names is exactly what Jay said. Okay, I don't want to be stuck having to be funny every single solitary time out the gate. It is hard work to make people laugh. It's really harder to kill somebody ugly and then you have to turn around and figure out a way to make people laugh without them screaming "fuck you" every time they talk to you on social media. So that is one of the reasons why I write under pen names. As Anita Ensall, I don't have to be funny. As Gemma Chase, I can delve into paranormal and gothic and a darker side and all these other things. As J.C. Koch, I write horror, and I can kill. The monster can win, and it's okay, and I don't have to make anybody laugh while I'm doing it. So to me, that's really good. But the other thing I think that really is important, because this is blurred genres, you need to be good at it. People shouldn't not be able to go, oh, well, that's the romantic subplot, and oh, well, it should be all of that. It should be seamless, so that you can't tell. Mysteries are my first love. I love mysteries, despite what people think. Everything I write has a mystery in it. My characters have to solve something, but you don't realize it because I've blurred that in so well. That's the foundation of the foundation of my house, right? That's the sticks that are holding it up, and everything else that goes around it are the other genres. But I write mystery all the time. I have romance in almost everything because I like it. Okay, we're not here without romance. None of us showed up. Right? Your parents fell in love in some way, right? And had you. That's what romance keeps our world going around. I don't want to ignore it. I want it in there, but it doesn't always have to be the main focus. But you have to make sure that you're blurring it seamlessly, that it works in that. And I mean, I know Stuart's a really good writer. So when he's saying, oh, I have the fantasy plot and I have the mystery plot, I already know he's seamlessly blending those. Do you know what I mean? I don't have to say, oh, that might be clunky, because Stuart's a really good writer. Okay. But if you're starting out, you need to become a good writer and learn how to do that. So practice makes perfect. No words written are ever wasted, but don't feel like every word you write is gold and should be saved. Many, many things deserve to be cut and put in your deletes file.
Nancy?
Getting back to the blending subject, kind of a corollary to that's like Stuart was talking about the beats in a romance novel. Every genre has its beats. And sometimes people will write a blended genre book, and one type of genre, the plot that centers on that, pops up every now and again, and it's not fully developed and it's not woven in. And there are different degrees to which you can do that. For me, what works best for me, and I know it doesn't work, that's not what everybody does, but I like to do a storyboard type thing, and I do a sticky in a different color for each plot line, for each chapter. And if I've discovered that I'm having trouble coming up with something to write on the pink sticky, then I think I better go back to that chapter and think, okay, sometimes it's just a sentence. It's a sentence or two that carries that storyline through, because that works for me, because that keeps me from losing track of it. But everybody has their own method, and people should do what works for them. But I think a mistake a lot of people make is they pay a lot of attention to one genre feature, and they don't, the other one's kind of an afterthought. And so it can't be an afterthought, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
So, Susan, I've come back around to you.
And I think everybody's already said anything I could have said, and they've said it better than I could. So I'm just going to have to take the loss and admit that everybody else here is probably a little bit smarter than me tonight.
Well, I think we've taken a pretty deep dive, and we've mixed the drinks at the bar, but it's time to bring this Liars Close to a close. That thing. Yeah, it's been a long day. So before we get out of here, let's make sure everybody knows where to find you guys, and of course, the genres you guys have been blending. So, Stuart?
You can find me at stuartjaffe.com. I'm also on Facebook. I have a group there, Stuart Jaffe's Madhouse. You can join that. And of course, everything's available in print, ebook. 90, probably 8% of it's on audiobook, Amazon, Audible, everywhere you want to get stuff online. So not hard to find me.
Jenny?
GiniKoch.com. I'm all over the place on Facebook. And you can easily join my free newsletter from my main Facebook fan page, Hairspray and Rock and Roll. Yeah, I'm on X, Twitter, Blue Sky, and Pinterest. It looks like I'm on Instagram, and I'm still not really there. People keep adding me. It's really stressful. And my latest releases I will be talking about the next thing. But I have several genre releases coming up. I just have a post-apocalyptic, but it's also got romance in it, and action and adventure. I have a humor collection that is combining all of my science fiction, fantasy, humor shorts that aren't in the Alien series, and that releases today, actually. And every one of those stories is a blend of something, because there's humor as well as science fiction or fantasy and all the other stuff. I will be, I don't know when this will release, but later in October, I will be at World Fantasy Con in Kansas City. And so if you're there, please come by.
Nancy?
My website is nancynorthcott.com. I'm on Facebook or X. I mean, I'm on Twitter or X or whatever it's called this week as Nancy Northcott, at Nancy Northcott. I'm on Blue Sky as Nancy North. I do have an Instagram account, but I'm not really good at using it. So I'm not on it a lot. I have a Facebook group called imaginatively Nancy Northcott Street Team. And right now it's an open group, so you can just go and check it out. I have an author page, but I'm almost never there. It exists so I can do other things that require you to have an author page before you do those. So that's basically it. The last release in the historical fantasy is The King's Champion and its conclusion to the Boar King's Honor trilogy. The next release in the Light Mage Wars book, which will be out at the end of October, is a novella called Magic and Murder. And it's, I guess, a secret identity kind of suspicion, murder mystery, paranormal romance.
Susan?
Website is shroddey.com. I am all over pretty much any and every social media you can find out there, with the exception of X, because it just got to be too hectic for me. My newest release in Spades just released last week. Official launch will be at Multiverse in Atlanta next weekend. I'm usually lurking somewhere on the internet, and it's pretty easy to find me. So,
Jay?
You can find me at jsmithaudio.com, and all my social media links are there on the main page. I believe in the try before you buy model, so you can download for free a lot of my short stories read by authors, read by artists, and then there are links to the actual books that you can buy. There's about 3 or 4 years worth of full cast audio drama, original music, original production elements there to download for free as well. You can stream them on Spotify, iTunes, and most of your major podcast and podcatching services.
Elmarie?
You can find me at elmariewood.com. You can social media, it's Elmarie Wood 1 or Elmarie Wood. It's either that on Facebook and or X Twitter. I have a new novella coming up from Raw Dog Screaming Press as part of their novella series. My book is book 2. It's called 12 Hours. You can pre-order on Amazon or on Raw Dog's website. Have some really amazing things coming out with Mocha Memoirs in November, Mocha Memoirs Press. So stay tuned to that. You can go to their website as well and check that out. Oh boy. Or my awesome short story companion with a novella series that's out at Falstaff or on Amazon right now. So lots of things that you could read if you were interested in checking out some psychological horror that has a little bit of everything in it. But you can definitely learn more at elmariewood.com.
And you can find me at jamesbnettles.com, authoressentialsworkshops.com, speculative-fiction-academy.com, along with Elmarie Wood, because
right. Right.
She never does. She never does.
No, and as soon as you said it, I'm like, oh God. Speculative Fiction Academy is the academy we started to teach you how to expand your horizons and write. So yes, Jim and I are there.
And of course, creatingprose.com. And then, well, when they stuff me in my box here. And until next week, this is the closing out of this Liars Club, and see y'all again soon.
Thank you.
See ya.